Hello, welcome to the third episode of Dorothy's Speed Shop, an attempt to do a sort of a weekly roundup of what's been happening down here in North Devon. This last weekend I was at the Adventure Bike Riders Festival, which if anybody went will know that was a humongous festival of motorcycling and adventuring. 12,500 people I think, loads of tents, loads of catering, loads of music. And probably the highlight for me anyway was the 30-kilometre off-road loop, which you could go around at your own leisure really. You could ride it as many laps as you could do in a day. It took about an hour, including the TRF Enduro loop. I took a load of CT110s up, so we're taking groups of riders around the off-road track to give them a taste of off-roading. The bike's obviously perfect for people who had never done it before. I mean, it's slightly chaotic. You've got fast riders, slow riders, and everyone in between, all on the same track. It got quite dry, so speeds increased. There were a few casualties, but, you know, as to be expected with the opportunity to ride at your own leisure with everyone else around a 30-kilometre track. There were elements of it that were challenging, elements that were easy, elements that were slow, and elements that were fast. It was a really good opportunity to see who's riding what and how are they riding. There were some very good riders on Tenere 700s, KTM 790, 890 Adventures. The Enduro bikes had been banned for this year, so I think what they've done, the Enduro riders have simply gone, well, I'll bring my KTM 890 this year, and they were going just as fast and just as hard. There was a great discrepancy of abilities, but everyone had a go. You know, there were lots of drops. The people on the big heavy bikes were dropping the bikes. I think it was natural. The terrain was probably a bit too difficult. They didn't have the tyres and the technique, but everyone was having a go and helping each other up and helping each other around. I thought as a representation of the adventure sector, I don't think you could ask for anything more really, because all bases were covered. Big bikes, small bikes, slow bikes, expensive bikes, cheap bikes. You've got Itchy Boots coming over, you've got Ryan F9. You got some really big names there doing talks and things. So, yeah, if anybody's interested in going to an adventure festival next year, I would definitely recommend the ABR festival. And if you're after something a bit smaller and more intimate, there's the Armchair Adventure Festival in July this year as well, which is being run by the Sidecar guys. So yeah, that was a great week. Great weekend even. One of the highlights was that MotoGP, the importer of Vogue, allowed me to take one of these around the track on my own. They just said, here's a bike, go off and ride it. I've got to say, I was very impressed with it. It's a Vogue 300 Rally, and why I'm interested in it is because it's £3,799. You know, we're entering an economic crisis. People haven't got the money. Not everyone wants to spend 25 grand on an adventure bike. People need good bikes for a reasonable amount of money. I think the Himalayan did so well because it came in at £4,000. It sort of undercut everyone else and went, well, here you go, have a cheap bike. And it actually turned out to be a good bike, so sold really well. MotoGP, who have picked Vogue up from Lexmoto started importing Vogue into the UK and brought in the 500 twins as well as the 650 single. Something went on there and Lexmoto either handed over or got taken away the Vogue importation rights, and MotoGP, who had recently been ditched by Royal Enfield, who decided to import their own bikes, picked up Vogue, which I think is a great coup for Vogue, because MotoGP have got the capacity, i.e. previously doing Royal Enfield, to bring on a new group of bikes and a new range of machines. So I think Vogue have been set up as well as they could be to succeed. They've got good dealer access, they've got a good importer, and at £3,799, I think they've given it's the best opportunity to succeed as they possibly could. At £3,799 plus on the road, that makes it £4,000. A current CRF 300 Rally, which I think is its closest adversary, is £6,500. So £2,500 more for the Honda. Spec-wise, they're pretty much on even keel. About 155 kilos wet, 29 brake horsepower for this, 27 for the CRF. The CRF's got a 1 Newton meter more of torque. But all in all, you know, it's the same bike, relatively similar. Seat height, about, 890 mil, i.e. quite tall. What I found on the off-road track as soon as I rode it is that there's far less sag on the Vogue. So those people who like the CRF but immediately have to change out the suspension because it's so soft at the back end, the Vogue is set up differently. It's set up pretty reasonably, so it sits quite tall at the rear, which is going to make it a little bit more difficult for shorter riders. But for, you know, anybody over 5'8", 5'9", I think they're going to benefit from the fact that you don't have to uprate the suspension straight out of the crate. So if you're looking for ticks and ways in which one bike's better than the other, I think from a suspension point of view, the Vogue tops the CRF. It was what made the bike around the off-road track at the ABR festival so good and so agile, and I was actually really impressed by the way it sat in the dirt and rode. Grip, turned, felt very comfortable, very capable. The immediate controls are good. The clutch is nice, smooth and progressive. Pulling away is nice and tractable. The engine is quite low geared. It's quite chuggy. So I think 18 miles an hour, it would pull fourth gear. 6 speed on it. I think there's been some criticisms that the engine is a little bit buzzy. And on the off-road track, it was difficult to get those higher speeds. But at sort of 45, 50, yes, you could start to feel a bit of a tingle through the pegs. So I think in terms of refinement, the CRF is that little bit smoother. How it gets on, how this goes on a longer trip, I'll find out next week when I have to ride it down to the Stella Alpina. I think that'll be kind of the make or break. If this will sit at 60, 65 in comfort, then there's nothing wrong with the engine. If you've got white finger and white toe from doing that, then yeah, maybe there's a bit of an issue there. Other aspects of the Vogue, one thing that I spotted when I picked it up from the dealer, it only runs on E5, not E10, which I think could be an issue in some parts of the UK, and whether it's an issue in Europe, I'll find out. I mean, personally, in our village, I don't think there's anybody who does E5 fuel. Speaking to the dealer yesterday, basically the ECU has been mapped to run on E5. How it runs on E10, we'll find out, because there's no way I'm going to be able to put E5 in it. So I think that's a little bit of a niggle. In terms of cost, ticket prices tells only one story. You've got to think, resale value, cost of servicing, etc. One thing about the Vogue is that it's a 3,000 mile service interval. That's to bring it into line with all of MotoGP's other brands, which they've all dictated to be 3,000 mile interval. It seems to be like an importer's policy. Whichever bike they import, it's going to be a 3,000 mile service interval. That doesn't necessarily relate to whether mechanically it needs it, but that as an organisation is what they've dictated it to be. That's pretty poor because the CRF is an 8,000 mile service interval. The CRF also has Honda's servicing package where you get the first 3 services for £400, which actually makes it quite a cheap bike to run for those first 16,000 miles. You have the first service at 600 miles, second at 8,000, third at 16,600. So for those first 16,000 miles, it's only going to cost you £400 to keep the dealer's warranty. For the Vogue, first dealer service at say 300 miles and then up to 16,000 miles, what you got another 5 services. Say two hours per service, say make 150, £200. You're looking at, what's that, 5 times 200, £1,000. So in 15,000 miles, it's going to cost you maybe £1,000 to service. That's going to weigh into it. Personally, if it was me buying a bike this cheap, I'd probably just, after the first few services, just decide to self-service it. But there's always going to be ways in which a cheaper bike has to claw back some income from its importer or its seller. It'll be interesting to see whether those softer elements of the bike's package, i.e. service intervals, affect sales. But when you look at it for a £4,000 bike, it's very difficult to find fault. It's got switchable ABS, it's got crash bars as standard, it's got a rear rack as standard, it's got handguard as standard. So automatically or already you've got about £500 up on a CRF 300 just in the parts that you'd have to fit from the aftermarket. £100 for a good set of handguards, £150 for some bars and a rear rack, maybe £300, let's say. So there's lots of ways you can look at it. I think for me, it's how it rides is what's really going to dictate whether this is going to sell or not, or whether it's going to do well or take sales away from the Honda. Going around the ABR track, to me, it was probably a better bike to ride, to steer, than a stock CRF. For the fact that a lot of these bikes are going to be ridden off-road is quite important, Does it matter how good it is on the road? Yes. Is it as important how it goes off-road? I don't think it is. So for the fact that there's a tick in the box for this off-road is quite a big thing. At least that's in my opinion, is quite a big thing. I was just editing that footage last night and I realised that I mentioned in passing about the Stella Alpina, and that really is the reason that I've got this bike on loan. There's a group of us taking a group down to the Stella Alpina Rally next week, which for anybody who doesn't know is a sort of iconic annual event where thousands, hundreds of motorcyclists gather to try and get to the top of this, one of the highest unpaved passes in the Alps. So I'm taking a group out there, we're doing some camping, we're doing some road riding to get down there, and then obviously a lot more unpaved roads when we are down there. I've got a lot of its peers coming down with me. I've got people on Himalayans, CRF 300Ls, rallies, I've got KTM 390 Adventures, GS 310s, I've also got some bigger bikes to go down with, CB 500X. So when I said to MotoGP, would you loan me one for that, they were quite keen to give me a bike to see how it would compare in that environment. So it's going to be a great test for it. I'm obviously keen to see, A, if it's reliable. Will it do 2,500 miles with no problem? Is it comfortable? What's the seat going to be like? I have fitted a cool cover which I'd got off on another bike, which happens just to fit quite nicely. So that should hopefully take care of comfort. See what are the vibrations like. You know, how is it on a long run when you've got 250 road miles to do to get down to somewhere? And equally, how much fun is it? Is it a fun, enjoyable bike to ride once you get down on the trails, and then looking at it in comparison to the people who are taking the CRFs and things like that? So hopefully it'll give a really good real world test of the bike, and I'll be able to do an update on it next week or so after when I get back. Also last night, I was just thinking about the value proposition at £4,000. If you wanted to widen the net, you could also look at the second-hand market. You can get a lot of these bikes for £4,000, and you get a really tidy CRF 250 Rally for that price. You get a Kawasaki Versys 300 for that price. You get a 390, a couple-of-year-old 390 KTM Adventure. You get a 1 or 2 year old GS 310. So I'm not necessarily saying you've got to look at brand new bikes, because you could say, well, I'll put £4,000 into a bike that's already been out and already has been proven and well tested and is already out by, I guess, a more well-known, respected brand. So that's obviously another option, another route you can go down. I think the natural brand new equivalent is the CRF 300, but from the second-hand market, £4,000 gets you a lot of bikes. So for any new manufacturer or new name, new brand to come on the scene and steal sales, it's going to take a good bike, and it's going to take good support, and it's going to have to take good initial feedback from the people who are buying them or using them, or in my case borrowing them. So very interested to see how it goes. I'm optimistic. I want to be optimistic because I like competition. I think competition brings the best out of other people who need to rise to the occasion. So maybe the arrival of brands such as Vogue will make companies such as Honda try that little bit harder, or maybe reassess their pricing strategy. Maybe not, we'll see. All right, I'll see you in a week or so. Cheers, bye.